Welcome to Rescue Paws Stories, your go-to place for heartwarming and emotional humans and animals stories. The sky wept a soft drizzle the morning of Emily's funeral, a quiet, overcast day in the small rural town of Belridge. The cemetery was nestled on a gentle hill, shrouded in fog and solemn silence. Friends and family gathered around a white coffin adorned with lilies, hearts heavy with the unbearable loss of a bright, kind-hearted 12-year-old girl whose life had been taken far too soon by a sudden illness. But amidst the mourners, one figure stood out. Not a person, but a scruffy, malnourished stray dog with matted fur and soulful amber eyes. No one knew where it had come from, but it had been sitting by the funeral home since dawn, unmoving and watchful. As the casket was lowered into the ground, the dog let out a low whine, heart-wrenching and raw, as if it too was mourning. People began whispering, confused. Some tried to shoo it away, thinking it was just a stray looking for food or shelter, but the dog refused to leave. It stayed curled up beside the fresh mound of earth long after the crowd dispersed, refusing food, rain soaking into its fur, eyes never leaving the gravestone. It was as if it was guarding something sacred. The next day, the dog was still there. And the next. Locals started calling it Shadow because it never left Emily's grave, even as days turned to weeks. The cemetery groundskeeper, Mr. Walton, began feeding it out of pity. But Shadow never followed him, nor accepted comfort. Then one afternoon, Emily's mother, Grace, returned to visit the grave. When she knelt to place fresh flowers, Shadow slowly approached her and gently rested his head on her lap. That's when Grace noticed it, an old faded collar beneath the grime. She leaned in and read the tag. To Emily, love always. Your secret friend, Max. Tears flooded Grace's eyes as memories surged back. Max, the neighborhood puppy Emily had found injured 2 years ago. She'd nursed him back to health in secret after his previous owners had abandoned him. Her parents, thinking he was a wild dog, made her release him back into the woods when he'd healed. Emily was heartbroken, but she never forgot Max. She often talked about him as if he were still close by, even saying he visited her in dreams. Grace had dismissed it as a child's imagination, but Max hadn't forgotten. Through storms, seasons, and time, he had wandered the woods and fields until he somehow found her again, only to return on the day she was laid to rest. Touched by the depth of the bond, Grace and her husband took Max home. At first, he refused to leave the gravesite, but with soft coaxing and Emily's old sweater, he finally followed. At the house, Max slept every night on Emily's bed, as if guarding her memories. He would stare at her photos, wagging his tail gently, whining at her old school bag, or sitting beside her empty chair during dinner. But then something strange happened. Emily's younger brother, Jamie, who had become withdrawn and barely spoke since her passing, began opening up again. It started with short sentences when Max licked his face, then giggles, then full conversations told only to Max about dreams where Emily smiled and said, "Thank you for watching over Max." Grace began keeping a journal, chronicling how Max somehow seemed to know when someone in the family was sad. He would sit beside them, offer his paw, or rest his head on their lap. It was as though he carried pieces of Emily's spirit with him, bringing her light back to a broken home. Years passed. Jamie grew older, Max slower. But the story of the stray dog at the funeral spread far and wide. News crews came, touched by the tale. A local artist even painted Max and Emily together beneath a tree, her hand resting gently on his fur, both looking into the horizon. Max passed away peacefully 7 years later, on the anniversary of Emily's death. That night, Jamie swore he saw Emily in his dream again. "He's with me now," she whispered, "but I'll always be with you." They buried Max beside Emily, beneath the same tree, their two graves side by side, forever united. And to this day, visitors sometimes find flowers at both headstones, not left by family or tourists, but scattered gently by the wind, or perhaps something unseen. Because some bonds, even between a child and her dog, are deeper than life and stronger than death. Months after Max was laid to rest beside Emily, something unusual began to draw quiet crowds to the cemetery. Gardenias, Emily's favorite flower, began blooming wildly and out of season right around their graves. The groundskeeper, Mr. Walton, swore he never planted them. One early morning, he even found paw prints in the morning dew circling the gravestones, fresh ones, though Max had been gone for months. Local children began telling stories of seeing a golden light around that part of the cemetery, especially at dusk. A few claimed they'd seen a little girl and her dog playing under the big maple tree, the one where Emily used to sit and draw, and where Max would curl up at her feet. Most adults dismissed it as imagination. But for Grace and Jamie, it felt like a message, a gentle, otherworldly sign that Emily and Max were still together, watching over them. The town, once indifferent to stray animals, began changing. Inspired by Max's loyalty and the story that touched so many hearts, a group of volunteers opened Emily's Haven, a small animal rescue center named in her memory. The motto painted on the front wall read, "Every soul deserves a second chance." Jamie helped out after school, now a bright teenager, more open and empathetic than ever. He'd say to anyone who asked, "Max didn't just save our family, he saved the heart of this whole town." Stories of rescues poured in, abandoned puppies nursed to health, senior dogs adopted by elderly residents, even a blind golden retriever who formed a healing bond with a grieving war veteran. Somehow, Max's spirit had ignited something in everyone. Kindness, courage, compassion. People who once turned away from stray dogs now stopped to offer food, warmth, or simply kindness. And then one snowy evening, 5 years later, Grace received a letter in the mail. It was from a woman hundreds of miles away. Inside was a photograph of a dog, one who looked eerily like Max, and a little girl holding its leash. The woman explained she had adopted this dog from Emily's Haven and swore that from the moment he entered their home, her daughter's chronic nightmares stopped. She says he sleeps by her bed and tells her stories in her dreams, the woman wrote. She says his name is Max, but we never told her that. Tears welled in Grace's eyes. She looked out the window at the gently falling snow, then at the 2 headstones beneath the tree. She whispered, "Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Max. You're still watching over them all." As spring returned, Emily's Haven became more than just a rescue shelter. It became a sanctuary of healing. People didn't just come to adopt animals. They came to sit under the old maple tree near Emily and Max's graves. Visitors left drawings, notes and toys. Some brought candles and whispered wishes. Many swore they felt a calming warmth, as though unseen eyes were watching, caring. Jamie, now 17, had become the soul of the shelter. Quiet and thoughtful, he'd often pause by the graves before opening the center each morning. On one particular dawn, he found a tiny puppy curled up between the 2 headstones. No tags, no tracks, just the softest, silver-furred pup sleeping peacefully. The puppy looked up at him with strangely familiar eyes and wagged its tail in a way that made Jamie drop to his knees, overwhelmed with emotion. "Max," he whispered, not expecting an answer. But somehow, deep inside, he felt it. A peace of Max had returned. They named the puppy Hope. Hope grew fast, gentle, wise, always by Jamie's side. Together they led school programs teaching compassion for animals, started food drives for strays, and organized therapy dog visits to hospitals. Hope had a gift. She always knew when someone needed her most, just like Max once had. Wherever she went, she left smiles and healing behind. Years passed. Emily's haven expanded, funded by a community, forever changed by a little girl and her loyal dog. And long after Grace and Jamie were gone, stories still spread of the miracle shelter, where broken souls found new purpose, and where a dog's love could outlast even death. And under that old maple tree, where flowers bloomed all year round, the legend lived on, of a stray dog who sat beside a coffin out of love and never really left. Days passed, but the memory of the funeral didn't fade. The townspeople spoke of Max like a legend now, not just as a stray, not just as a companion, but as a symbol of something lost in the world. Loyalty without limits. After the funeral, Jamie, the shelter worker who had taken Hope in, began noticing subtle changes in the puppy. Hope would often walk to the small memorial erected at the cemetery, lying exactly where Max once sat, staring at the same patch of sky. Every time she visited, it was as if something guided her there, as though Max's spirit lingered, not to mourn, but to watch over. On the anniversary of Emily's death, something extraordinary happened. As the community gathered for a candlelight vigil in her honor, Hope, now grown and radiant, led the crowd through the darkness, carrying a white rose in her mouth. She walked slowly, deliberately, stopping in front of Emily's grave and gently placing the rose on the headstone. The people gasped, not just at the sight, but at the moment's eerie familiarity. It mirrored what Max had done a year before with the same flower. Some whispered that Max's soul had passed into Hope. Others believed it was Emily, guiding them all back together. But the most emotional moment came when an elderly woman approached the grave. She was frail, holding a photograph of Emily in one hand and a stuffed animal in the other. This was hers, the woman said softly. She called it Max Jr. She told me once, if anything ever happens to me, I want Max to have this. The woman bent down and placed the toy by the stone. Hope sniffed it gently, then curled up beside it and stayed there the entire night, just as Max once had. That night, no one wanted to leave. Some brought blankets, others brought candles. It became more than a vigil. It became a gathering of souls bound not by blood, but by love, grief, memory, and healing. The local news covered the moment. Photos of the dog beside the grave spread online again. But this time, it wasn't just sorrow people saw, it was hope. Soon, donations poured into the animal shelter. Jamie expanded it, naming the new wing Max's Sanctuary. It became a place not only for abandoned animals, but for children who had lost parents, veterans struggling with PTSD, and the elderly who felt forgotten. And in the center of it all, hope lived, not just as a dog, but as a guardian, a gentle reminder that love never dies. It only transforms. Years later, long after the world had moved on, someone visited Emily's grave again. A child, walking hand in hand with his mother, looked at the now older Hope resting peacefully near the headstone. "Mommy," the child asked, "is that angel dog still waiting for someone?" "No, sweetheart," the mother smiled, brushing a tear from her cheek. "She's already found who she was waiting for. She's just making sure we never forget them."